Good morning, school. Yesterday, the 27th of January, was Holocaust Memorial Day 2022. Holocaust Memorial Day is a day each year when we remember the 6 million Jewish people who were systematically persecuted and murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators during the Holocaust. We also remember the other groups of people who were persecuted and murdered, such as Roma and Shinti people, disabled people, gay people, Jehovah's Witnesses, political opponents, and many, many others. Genocide is when a group of people is targeted for destruction just because of who they are, such as their race or their religion. Genocide does not happen out of the blue. It is the result of prejudice and persecution, which sees a group treated differently from the rest of society. On Holocaust Memorial Day, we are reminded of what can happen when prejudice and persecution are left unchallenged, and of our responsibilities to stand against these processes when we see them in our own communities. Henry Vermuth was a young Jewish man in Germany when the Holocaust began. I want to tell you his story. Henry Vermuth was born in 1923 in Frankfurt, Germany, to Bernhard and Ida Vermuth. His sister Hannah was born in 1929. As a boy, Henry was fiercely patriotic and experienced almost no anti-Semitism. The rise of the Nazis in 1933, however, changed everything for Henry and his family. In October of 1938, the Nazis deported German Jewish citizens with Polish ancestry to Poland. This included Henry's parents, who were born in Poland, so the whole family were woken in the middle of the night and sent to Krakow by train, where they stayed with relatives. Henry spent a happy year there until Germany invaded Poland in September of 1939. Soon, Jews living in Nazi-occupied Poland were forced to wear a white armband with a blue Star of David and made to clean streets of snow and ice. Bernard and Henry supported the family by trading on the black market until Bernard was caught and sent to prison. Bernard was released in late 1940, and Henry's family moved to the small town of Bochnia. By the summer of 1942, Henry and Bernard were forced to build roads for nearby labour camp called Klaj. They heard rumours that 2 million Jews had by now been murdered. Henry knew that soon deportations would begin from Bochnia and wanted to save his family. Henry used cardboard to make a hiding place for Ida and Hannah in the crawl space above the family's front door. On the 22nd of August, Henry and Bernard's work group were told that they would be spending the night in Klaj. As they left, Henry urged his mother, "Promise me you will go into the secret place." 2 days later, the deportation of Bochnia's Jews took place. A week later, Henry and Bernard returned to Bochnia and found photographs of Ida and Hannah in the crawl space. On the back of each picture was a goodbye message. Ida would probably have heard the SS shouting that anyone who did not board the train would be shot. It may have seemed safer to go. It was the first and only time that Henry saw his father cry. Henry's mother and sister travelled from Bochnia to Belzec extermination camp. All those on board the train were murdered. In the autumn of 1942, Henry heard rumours that Hitler was due to pass near Klaj on a train. Henry believed his mother and sister were still alive, and that if Hitler died, everything would go back to normal. Despite the danger and Bernard's objections, Henry felt he had to do something. That night, Henry made his way through the forest to the railway line, avoiding guards patrolling the area. Using stones and thick lengths of wood, Henry blocked the train track. The following morning, Henry waited for the sound of a collision, but it never came. He never found out what had happened. Soon after, Henry and Bernard were put on a train and sent to Plaszow concentration camp. Subjected to sadistic and violent treatment, Henry remembers Plaszow was the worst of the 9 camps he was imprisoned in. On 31st of July 1944, Henry and Bernard were marched onto a train heading for Auschwitz-Birkenau. Suspecting they were to be murdered, Bernard said to Henry a sentence that he never forgot. "Should we be gassed, breathe deeply, my son, breathe deeply to get it over with quickly." Upon arrival at Auschwitz, they were sent to be deloused and told to undress. Certain he was to die, Henry kept the photograph of his mother and sister in his hand. However, Henry's group was marked for work instead, and the next day he was tattooed on his forearm with the number B3407. Inmates were fed tiny portions of bread and margarine and a bowl of thin soup. On such a small amount of food and with such a heavy workload, people were starving to death. In January 1945, the SS evacuated Auschwitz, marching prisoners out of the camp and onto a train. The next few months saw the SS trying to avoid capture, and Henry and Bernard were moved from camp to camp. One morning, the capo in charge of Henry's group hit Bernard in the head. The prisoners were loaded onto a train, and Bernard began to complain of increasing pain. He was taken to hospital, but died on the 27th of April 1945, just 11 days before the war ended. That day, Henry, now alone in the world, entered Mauthausen. Conditions were appalling, and Henry was starving and suffering from diarrhea. He weighed only 5 stone when Americans liberated the camp on the 5th of May 1945. He had survived, and he had to face rebuilding his life with no friends or family. After the war, Henry made his way to the United Kingdom. He was only allowed to stay for 2 years, but after writing to the Queen Mother and finding a job, he was able to settle in Britain. He became a successful businessman, married, had 2 children, and now has 3 grandchildren. Henry continues to speak about his experiences. In 1995, he was awarded the Johanna Kirchner Medal by the city of Frankfurt for his attempt to assassinate Hitler. Henry and his family were targeted and murdered simply because they were Jewish. People are still discriminated against today because of their religion, their race, their sexuality, or another element of their identity. Now that you have learned about Holocaust Memorial Day and heard Henry's story, I want to ask all of you to think about how dangerous discrimination can be. At this very moment, genocide is taking place around the world. Let us all today commit to do something, no matter how small, to stand up against prejudice and the processes of persecution. Holocaust Memorial Day is one day. It's the 27th of January. It's a day that we put aside to come together to remember and learn about the Holocaust, Nazi persecution, and the genocides that followed, such as in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur. We hope that there may be one day in the future with no genocide. We learn more about the past, we empathise with others today, and we take action for a better future. Because as Holocaust survivor Ibi Knil said, "You didn't think about yesterday, and tomorrow may not happen. It was only today that you had to cope with, and you got through it as best you could." Thank you for listening.